My son Mike looked me straight in the eye and said the words that changed everything between us forever. "Mom, we're going to have to cancel your birthday party. Ashley and I need that money for our trip to Italy." What he didn't know was that, while he was planning his expensive vacation, I was planning something that would shock our entire family. By the time you hear the end of this story, you'll understand why my wedding day became the most satisfying moment of my 62 years on this earth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Linda Martinez, and for the past 8 years, I've been living what most people would call a quiet life. After my husband Carlos died in that terrible car accident, I thought my chapter of love and adventure was over. I was 54 then, and everyone around me seemed to agree that I should settle into the role of the devoted widow and grandmother. I moved from our family home into a small 2-bedroom apartment at Desert Vista, a modest complex in suburban Phoenix where the rent was manageable on my part-time library salary. Every morning, I'd wake up in my simply furnished bedroom, make my coffee in the tiny kitchen that overlooked the apartment complex's pool, and prepare for another day at the Phoenix Public Library's Central Branch. I loved working at the information desk, helping people find books, answering questions about computer usage, and organizing the community programs. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave me purpose and kept me connected to people. The other librarians, mostly women around my age, had become my closest friends at work. My 3 children had grown into adults with their own lives, their own problems, and their own opinions about how I should be living. Mike, my eldest at 35, had built what he considered a successful life in Scottsdale. He worked as an insurance agent, lived in one of those cookie-cutter McMansions with his wife Ashley, and spent most of his free time at the country club or planning expensive vacations. Ashley, his wife of 10 years, drove a white BMW SUV and posted constantly on social media about their affluent lifestyle. They had 2 children, Emma and Jake, who I adored but rarely got to see unless it was convenient for their parents. Danny, my middle son at 31, worked in IT for a tech company and lived alone in a downtown Phoenix loft. He was the quietest of my children, always staying neutral whenever family tensions arose. Danny would show up for obligatory family gatherings, be polite and pleasant, but never really engage in any meaningful conversations. I sometimes wondered if he was protecting himself from the family drama, or if he simply didn't care enough to get involved. Sophia, my youngest at 28, was the one I felt closest to, though even that relationship had its limitations. She taught elementary school and lived in Tempe with her husband Kevin, a sweet accountant who always seemed uncomfortable during family gatherings. Sophia would call me regularly, ask about my health and my work, but I could sense that she saw me the same way her brothers did, as someone whose life was essentially over, someone who needed to be managed rather than celebrated. The apartment I lived in reflected what everyone expected of me. It was clean, organized, and completely unremarkable. I had a small living room with a couch I'd bought at a discount furniture store, a television that was at least 5 years old, and family photos arranged on a bookshelf that held my personal collection of novels and self-help books. My bedroom contained a modest double bed, a dresser with a mirror, and a small desk where I paid bills and occasionally wrote letters to old friends. The second bedroom served as a combination guest room and storage space, though guests were rare. My daily routine was predictable, and if I was being honest with myself, lonely. I'd drive my 12-year-old Honda Civic to work 3 days a week, spend my shifts helping library patrons, then come home to prepare simple dinners for one. Evenings were spent reading, watching television, or calling one of my children, though those conversations rarely lasted long. Weekends meant grocery shopping, laundry, and maybe coffee with Maggie Thompson, my neighbor and closest friend. Maggie lived 2 doors down from me and had become my confidant over the years. She was 59, a retired nurse whose husband had died around the same time as Carlos. Unlike me, Maggie had never accepted the role of the quiet widow. She was feisty, opinionated, and constantly encouraging me to take more risks with my life. "Linda," she'd say over our Saturday morning coffee by the pool, "you're acting like your life ended when Carlos died. You're only 62, not 92. But the truth was, I had accepted my role. I'd convinced myself that this quiet, unremarkable existence was appropriate for a woman my age. My children seemed to prefer me this way, manageable, predictable, and not requiring too much attention or emotional energy from them. When they needed me for babysitting or help with something, I was available. When they wanted to make plans that didn't include me, I didn't complain. I had become what everyone expected me to be, the selfless mother and grandmother who lived for others. The financial reality of my situation reinforced these limitations. Carlos's life insurance had paid off our house, but I'd sold it after. He died because maintaining it alone felt overwhelming. The money from the sale, combined with his small pension and my part-time wages, was enough to cover my basic needs, but didn't leave room for anything extra like travel, expensive hobbies, or spontaneous purchases. I shopped at discount stores, clipped coupons, and had learned to find satisfaction in small pleasures like a good book from the library or a successful recipe from a magazine. My children were aware of my financial constraints, though they seemed to view them as character flaws rather than circumstances. Mike, especially, had developed a condescending attitude about my modest lifestyle. He'd make comments about my car, my apartment, or my clothes. Never directly critical, but always delivered with a tone that suggested I should be embarrassed about my situation. Ashley was worse, often making observations about how different our lives were, how she couldn't imagine living in such a small space or driving such an old car. The irony was that I'd actually grown to appreciate certain aspects of my simple life. There was something peaceful about not having to maintain appearances or worry about impressing anyone. I genuinely enjoyed my work at the library, found comfort in my small apartment, and had developed a routine that felt stable even if it wasn't exciting. But I was also aware of a growing emptiness, a sense that I was existing rather than truly living. This feeling became more pronounced during family gatherings, which usually took place at Mike and Ashley's house in Scottsdale. Their home was everything mine wasn't. Spacious, expensively decorated, and designed to impress. Ashley would give tours to anyone who visited, pointing out the granite countertops, the custom cabinets, and the backyard with its pool and outdoor kitchen. Mike would talk about their latest purchases, their vacation plans, or his success at work, while I sat quietly in their living room, feeling like a poor relation who was being tolerated rather than welcomed. During these visits, I'd watch my grandchildren, Emma and Jake, and feel a mixture of love and sadness. They were good kids, but they clearly saw me as the grandmother who lived in the small apartment and couldn't afford to take them on exciting outings or buy them expensive gifts. When they talked about their other grandmother, Ashley's mother, who lived in California and sent lavish presents, I could see the difference in their enthusiasm. The pattern had been established over years, and everyone had settled into their roles. I was the quiet, financially struggling widow who needed to be handled carefully. My children were the successful adults who occasionally checked on their mother, but didn't expect much from her in return. It was a dynamic that worked for everyone, except, perhaps, for me. But 8 months ago, something unexpected happened that began to crack the foundation of this carefully constructed reality. I was working my usual Tuesday shift at the library when I noticed a new face at our weekly book club meeting. The man was tall, probably in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes. He was dressed simply in khakis and a polo shirt, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that immediately caught my attention. "I'm Bob Wellington," he introduced himself to the group. "I just moved to Phoenix and someone recommended your book club. I hope it's okay that I'm joining you." Bob had recently lost his wife and was looking for ways to connect with people in his new city. He was soft-spoken, but thoughtful, asking insightful questions about the novel we were discussing, and listening carefully to everyone's responses. After the meeting, he approached me at the information desk. "Thank you for making me feel welcome," he said with a warm smile. I haven't been part of a book club in years, but this felt like exactly what I needed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We talked for a few minutes about books, about Phoenix, about the challenges of starting over in a new place. He mentioned that he was living alone in a small apartment not far from the library and was still adjusting to the quiet after losing his wife 3 years earlier. There was something about his honesty, his willingness to admit vulnerability, that resonated with me. Over the following weeks, Bob became a regular at book club, and we began having conversations before and after the meetings. He was intelligent and well-read, but he also had a gentle sense of humor that made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. He asked genuine questions about my life, my work, my interests, and seemed genuinely interested in my answers. When I mentioned that I'd always wanted to take a creative writing class but felt too old to start, he encouraged me to look into the community college programs. "Linda," he said one evening as we walked to our cars after book club, "age is just a number. If you want to write, you should write." That conversation led to my enrolling in a creative writing class at Maricopa Community College, something I did without mentioning it to my children. For the first time in years, I was doing something purely for myself, something that had nothing to do with being a mother or grandmother or widow. The class met Tuesday evenings, and I found myself looking forward to it all week. Bob and I began spending more time together outside of book club. We'd meet for coffee before my writing class, take walks through the Desert Botanical Garden, or attend free lectures at the community college. He was easy to talk to, and I found myself sharing thoughts and feelings I'd kept buried for years. He told me about his late wife, about the loneliness of losing a life partner, about the challenge of rebuilding an identity after decades of being half of a couple. What struck me most about Bob was how he saw me. When we talked, I wasn't the poor widow who needed managing or the aging mother whose best years were behind her. I was Linda, a woman with opinions, dreams, and stories worth hearing. He complimented my intelligence, my sense of humor, my kindness to the library patrons. He made me feel interesting and valuable in ways I'd forgotten were possible. After 3 months of friendship, our relationship began to shift into something deeper. Bob asked if I'd like to have dinner with him at a nice restaurant, making it clear that he was asking me on a date. I was terrified and excited in equal measure. It had been 8 years since I'd thought of myself as someone a man might find attractive or desirable. The dinner was wonderful. Bob was attentive and charming, asking about my past, my interests, my hopes for the future. He talked about his own journey through grief and his decision to move to Phoenix to start fresh. He was clearly educated and well-traveled, but he wore his knowledge lightly, never making me feel inadequate or unsophisticated. As our relationship developed over the following months, I began to feel like a different person, or perhaps like my true self for the first time in years. Bob encouraged me to pursue my writing, to take chances, to believe in my own worth. He treated me like an equal partner, asking for my opinions and valuing my input. When we were together, I felt alive and engaged in ways I'd almost forgotten were possible. But I kept our relationship largely secret from my children. I'd mentioned casually that I'd met someone at book club, but I downplayed the seriousness of our connection. Part of me was protecting this new happiness from their potential criticism or interference. Part of me wasn't sure they'd believe that their poor, widowed mother could attract someone like Bob. And part of me was simply enjoying having something that was entirely mine, unmarked by their expectations or judgments. This was the state of my life when Mike made the phone call that changed everything between us. I was living in two worlds: the quiet, constrained existence my family expected from me, and the growing, vibrant relationship with Bob that was teaching me to see myself differently. I had no idea that these two worlds were about to collide in ways that would force everyone to see me and themselves more clearly. The call came on a Wednesday evening in March. I was preparing dinner in my small kitchen, looking forward to my writing class the next day when my phone rang. Mike's name appeared on the screen, which immediately made me smile. My eldest son rarely called just to chat, so I assumed he wanted to discuss plans for my upcoming birthday. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, turning down the heat under the vegetables I was sautéing. "Hey, Mom, do you have a minute to talk?" Something in his tone made me pause. It was the voice he used when he had news he thought I wouldn't like. The same tone he'd used years ago when telling me about changes to holiday plans or explaining why they couldn't visit as often as they'd hoped. "Of course," I said, moving to sit at my small kitchen table. "What's on your mind?" "Mom, Ashley, and I have been doing some financial planning for the rest of the year, and we've had to make some tough decisions about our budget." Mike's voice carried that familiar tone of forced patience, as if he were explaining something complicated to a child. I waited for him to continue, still assuming this conversation would somehow lead to discussing my birthday celebration. In 3 weeks, I would turn 63, and for the past 2 months, Mike and Ashley had been talking about hosting a party at the Scottsdale Country Club. It would be my first real birthday celebration since Carlos died, and I'd been looking forward to it more than I cared to admit. "The thing is," Mike continued, "we've decided to take the kids to Italy this summer. It's an amazing opportunity, and the educational value for Emma and Jake will be incredible. They'll get to see the Colosseum, the Vatican, all those historical sites we've read about." I smiled, genuinely happy for them. "That sounds wonderful, Mike. What an adventure for the whole family." "Right, exactly. But here's the situation, Mom. The trip is more expensive than we initially calculated. Between flights, hotels, tours, and everything else, we're looking at about $25,000 for the 4 of us." $25,000. I tried to hide my surprise at the amount. That was more than I made in an entire year at the library. But I'd long ago accepted that my children lived in a different financial reality than I did. "That's quite an investment," I said carefully. "But I'm sure it will create wonderful memories for the children." "It will, which is why we've decided to prioritize it. But that means we need to cut back on some other expenses this year." He paused, and in that silence, I began to understand where this conversation was heading. "Mom, we're going to have to cancel your birthday party." The words hit me like cold water. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't quite process what I'd heard. The birthday party that had been planned for weeks, that Ashley had mentioned excitedly during our last phone conversation, that I'd been anticipating as a chance to feel celebrated and important to my family, was being canceled so they could afford their vacation. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" I managed to ask. "The birthday party, Mom. We can't swing both the Italy trip and the party expenses. The country club venue alone is $1,500, and that's before food, decorations, and everything else. We figured you'd understand, especially since you're always telling us to be responsible with money." I sat in my small kitchen, staring at the half-prepared dinner on my stove, trying to absorb the casual cruelty of what I was hearing. My birthday celebration, something that would cost them perhaps $3,000 total, was being sacrificed for their $25,000 vacation without any discussion, without any consideration for how I might feel about it. "You figured I'd understand," I repeated slowly. "Well, yeah. I mean, you're not really a big party person anyway, right? And honestly, Mom, spending that much money on a party seems kind of frivolous when you think about it. The Italy trip is an investment in the kids' education and our family memories." Investment in family memories. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. What he was really saying was that their family memories mattered, but any memories, involving me were dispensable. "Mike," I said, finding my voice, "when you and Ashley first suggested hosting this party, I told you it wasn't necessary. I said we could do something simple, maybe just dinner at a nice restaurant. You insisted. On the country club. You said it would be a proper celebration, that I deserved something special. I know, but circumstances change. You have to be flexible about these things." Flexible. I'd been flexible my entire adult life. Flexible when Carlos worked late and missed family dinners. Flexible when the children changed holiday plans at the last minute. Flexible when they needed babysitting or help with emergencies. Flexible when they made decisions about my life without consulting me. Always flexible, always understanding, always putting everyone else's needs before my own. "What if we postponed the Italy trip?" I heard myself asking. "Just for a few months. Until after my birthday?" Mike's silence was answer enough, but he spelled it out anyway. "Mom, that's not realistic. We've already made deposits and the kids are really excited. We can't disappoint them." But disappointing me was perfectly acceptable. "I see," I said quietly. "Look, we can still do something for your birthday. Maybe dinner at that Mexican place you like. Or we could have cake at our house. It doesn't have to be a big production." The Mexican place I liked. He was talking about a chain restaurant where the meals cost $12 each. After canceling a $1,500 venue for their vacation, he was offering me a $40 dinner as a consolation prize. "That's very generous of you," I said, and I could hear the edge in my own voice. "Mom, don't be like that. You know we love you, and we'll still celebrate your birthday. It just won't be as elaborate as we originally planned." As elaborate as they had planned, not as elaborate as I had requested. I'd never asked for elaborate. I'd never asked for the country club or the expensive venue. But now that they were taking it away, it was somehow my fault for being disappointed. "Is Ashley there?" I asked. "She's getting the kids ready for bed. Why?" "I'd like to speak with her about this decision." Another pause. "Mom, this was a joint decision. We talked about it extensively before I called you." Of course they had. They'd had extensive discussions about my birthday, about my feelings, about what I deserved, and I hadn't been included in any of those conversations. They'd made a choice that directly affected me, and I was the last person to be informed. "I understand," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." "You're being weird about this, Mom. It's not like we're canceling your birthday entirely. We're just scaling back the celebration." Scaling back. Another euphemism for, you don't matter as much as we pretended you did. "I need to go, Mike. My dinner is burning." "Okay, but Mom, please don't make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. We're still going to celebrate you." After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for several minutes, staring at the phone in my hand. The vegetables I'd been cooking were indeed burning, filling the small space with smoke. I turned off the heat and opened the windows, but the acrid smell lingered, much like the conversation I'd just had. I tried to analyze my feelings rationally. It was just a party. I was a grown woman, not a child who needed a big celebration to feel valued. My children had financial priorities, and a vacation for their family was certainly more important than an expensive party for one person. I should be understanding, supportive, mature about this change in plans. But underneath the rational thoughts was a deeper hurt that I couldn't dismiss so easily. This wasn't really about a party. It was about being an afterthought, about my feelings being considered less important than their convenience. It was about the casual way Mike had delivered this news, assuming I would accept it without question because that's what I always did. I thought about all the times I'd been flexible, all the occasions when I'd adjusted my expectations to accommodate their needs, when they'd changed Christmas plans because Ashley's family was visiting, when they'd canceled Easter dinner because the kids had other activities, when they'd forgotten my birthday entirely 2 years ago and called 3 days later with apologies and promises to make it up to me, which they never did. I'd accepted all of it because I thought that's what good mothers do. They prioritize their children's happiness, even when those children are adults with their own families. They don't make demands or create drama over relatively small disappointments. They understand that life is complicated and plans sometimes change. But as I cleaned up my burned dinner and sat down with a simple sandwich instead, I realized something had shifted inside me during that phone call. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was angry. Not hurt, not disappointed, but genuinely angry at being treated as if my feelings didn't matter. The anger surprised me with its intensity. I'd spent so many years suppressing negative emotions, telling myself that being understanding and accommodating was more important than standing up for myself. But sitting alone in my small apartment, thinking about Mike's casual dismissal of my birthday in favor of his family's vacation, I felt something awakening in me that had been dormant for too long. I called Maggie. "Linda, honey, you sound upset. What's wrong?" I told her about the conversation with Mike, about the canceled party and the Italy trip. As I spoke, I could hear my own voice getting stronger, clearer, more definite. "That little shit," Maggie said when I finished. "Sorry, I know he's your son, but that's exactly what he is. A selfish little shit who thinks his mother's feelings don't matter." "Maggie, that's not..." "Don't you dare defend him, Linda Martinez. That boy just told you that his vacation is more important than your birthday, and he expected you to smile and say thank you. When was the last time you asked him for anything? When was the last time you made any demands on him or his precious wife?" I thought about it. "I can't remember." "Exactly. You've spent 8 years being the perfect, undemanding widow who never causes problems or asks for attention. And this is how he repays you. By canceling your birthday party for his damn vacation." The conversation with Maggie lasted over an hour, and by the time we hung up, something fundamental had changed in how I saw the situation. This wasn't about being understanding or flexible. This was about respect. And my son had shown me that he didn't respect me enough to consider my feelings when making decisions that affected me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation with Mike, hearing the tone in his voice, the casual assumption that I would accept whatever scraps of attention he was willing to give me. I thought about all the years I'd spent making myself smaller, less demanding, easier to manage. I thought about the woman I'd been before Carlos died, and the woman I'd become since meeting Bob. I realized I wanted to talk to him about this, to hear his perspective on what had happened. For months, I'd been compartmentalizing our relationship, keeping it separate from my family dynamics. But lying awake in the dark, I understood that I trusted his judgment in ways I hadn't trusted anyone's in years. The next morning, I called him. "Linda, you sound troubled. What's happening?" I told him about Mike's call, about the canceled birthday party and the Italy trip. As I spoke, I could hear the hurt and anger in my own voice, emotions I'd been taught to suppress, but that felt honest and justified in the light of day. Bob listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "How did that make you feel?" he asked finally. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked it. Not Mike, who had assumed my feelings didn't matter. Not Ashley, who hadn't even bothered to speak with me directly. Not Danny or Sophia, who I hadn't even called because I knew they would tell me to be understanding and not cause family drama. "Invisible," I said, surprising myself with the honesty of the answer. Like, I don't matter enough to be considered when decisions are made that affect me. "And how long have you been feeling invisible in your family?" Another simple question that cut straight to the heart of everything. How long had I been feeling invisible? Years, maybe decades. Certainly since Carlos died, but possibly long before that. "I think I've been invisible for a very long time," I admitted. Linda, may I ask you something that might be difficult to answer? Yes. When was the last time you felt truly valued by your children? Not loved, because I'm sure they love you in their way, but valued. When was the last time they treated you as if your opinions, your feelings, your presence actually mattered? To them. I thought about it for several minutes, going back through recent years, trying to remember a time when any of my children had made me feel important, sought my advice, included me in meaningful decisions, or prioritized my needs over their convenience. I can't think of a specific time, I said finally. Then perhaps it's time you started valuing yourself enough to demand that treatment from others. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I drove to Maricopa Community College and signed up for 3 additional classes: business fundamentals, personal finance, and public speaking. If my family saw me as someone whose life was essentially over, whose opinions didn't matter, whose feelings could be dismissed without consequence, then perhaps it was time to show them a different version of Linda Martinez. But the real decision, the one that would change everything, came that evening when Bob asked if I'd like to have dinner with him at a nice restaurant downtown. Actually, I heard myself saying, would you like to come to my apartment instead? I'd like to cook for you, and there's something important I want to discuss. As I prepared dinner for Bob that night, I felt different than I had in years. The anger from Mike's phone call had crystallized into something more powerful: determination. I was 62 years old, not 92. I was intelligent, capable, and deserving of respect. I had spent 8 years living as if my life was over, and I was done with that version of myself. When Bob arrived with flowers and a bottle of wine, I looked at this kind, intelligent man who saw me as worthy of his time and attention, and I made another decision that would have been unthinkable just days before. Bob, I said as we sat down to dinner, I need to tell you something about my family situation, and then I want to ask you a question that might surprise you. Part 3. The Call to Adventure. Bob set down his wine glass and gave me his full attention, the way he always did when I spoke. It was one of the things I'd grown to love about him, how he listened as if my words actually mattered, as if my thoughts and feelings were worth his time and consideration. The question I want to ask you, I continued, feeling my heart race, with the audacity of what I was about to say, is whether you'd be interested in getting married. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was profound. Bob's expression didn't change to one of shock or confusion. Instead, he smiled slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something he'd been hoping to hear. Linda Martinez, he said, softly, are you proposing to me? I suppose I am, I replied, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. I know it's unconventional, and I know we've only been together for 8 months, but Bob, you've shown me what it feels like to be valued again. You've reminded me that I'm still a whole person with thoughts and dreams and opinions that matter. I told him about Mike's phone call, about the years of being treated as an afterthought, about the growing realization that I'd been living my life according to everyone else's expectations rather than my own desires. I'm 62 years old, I said, and I've spent the last 8 years being the perfect widow, quiet, undemanding, grateful for whatever scraps of attention my children threw my way. But I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be the woman I am when I'm with you. Bob reached across my small dining table and took my hands in his. Linda, I've been in love with you for months, but I didn't want to pressure you or move too fast. I know how important your family is to you, and I didn't want to complicate those relationships. My family, I said with a bitter laugh, treats me like I'm already dead. They make decisions about my life without consulting me, cancel plans that matter to me for their convenience, and expect me to smile and be grateful for whatever attention they're willing to give me. I'm done living that way. So what are you proposing exactly? Bob asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already understood. I'm proposing that we get married soon, and that we don't tell my family until it's done. I want them to discover that their invisible, manageable mother has a life they know nothing about. I want them to realize that while they were taking me for granted, I was building something beautiful and meaningful with someone who actually sees my worth. The conversation that followed was unlike any I'd ever had with another person. Bob and I talked about our feelings for each other, about our hopes for the future, about the practical aspects of combining our lives. He told me he'd been wanting to ask me to marry him, but had been waiting for what seemed like the right moment. I've been alone for 3 years, he said, and I'd accepted that my life would be quiet and solitary from now on. Then I met you, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to want to share experiences with another person, to wake up excited about spending time with someone, to feel like I had a partner in life again. We decided that night to get married within the month, before Mike and Ashley left for Italy. We would plan a small ceremony, invite a few close friends, and tell my family afterward. It wasn't about revenge or spite. It was about reclaiming my right to make decisions about my own life without needing anyone's permission or approval. There's something I should tell you, Bob said as we cleared the dinner dishes. Something about my financial situation that I've been hesitant to mention because I didn't want it to complicate our relationship. I paused in loading the dishwasher. What kind of complication? I'm not poor, Linda. I'm actually quite wealthy. Very wealthy, in fact. I stared at him, trying to process this information. Bob lived in a small apartment similar to mine, drove a modest sedan, dressed simply, and never spent money in ways that suggested significant wealth. What do you mean by very wealthy? I mean, I'm worth several $100 million. I owned a manufacturing company that I sold 3 years ago, shortly before my wife died. I've been living modestly because I wanted to figure out who I was, without the business, without the social obligations that came with having money. I wanted to find out what mattered to me when I wasn't defined by my financial success. I sat down heavily in one of my kitchen chairs, trying to absorb this revelation. The man I'd fallen in love with, who I'd just proposed to, was not the retired middle-class widower I'd assumed him to be. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. Because I wanted you to know me, not my bank account. I wanted our relationship to develop based on who we are as people, not on what I could provide financially. Too many relationships in my past were complicated by money, people wanting things from me, treating me differently because of my wealth, making assumptions about what I wanted or needed based on my financial status. I thought about my own family, about how they'd treated me differently since Carlos died and my income became limited. How they'd made assumptions about my capabilities, my desires, my worth based on my financial circumstances. I understand, I said. But Bob, if we get married, this changes everything. My family will think I'm after your money. They'll assume you're taking advantage of me or that I'm taking advantage of you. Does it matter what they think? The question stopped me cold. Did it matter what they thought? I'd spent years modifying my behavior, my expectations, my very sense of self based on what my family thought. But these were the same people who'd just canceled my birthday party for their vacation. These were the people who'd made me feel invisible and unimportant for years. No, I said slowly. I don't think it does matter what they think. Then let's plan a wedding. Over the next 2 weeks, Bob and I threw ourselves into wedding planning with an energy and excitement I hadn't felt since I was a young woman. We decided on a small ceremony at St. Anthony's Catholic Church, where Carlos and I had been married 40 years earlier. Father Rodriguez, who had known our family for decades, agreed to perform the ceremony. We invited 12 people total, Maggie and 3 other friends from the library, Bob's brother and sister-in-law who were flying in from California, and 6 friends from our book club. No family members, No children or grandchildren. Just people who genuinely cared about our happiness and wanted to celebrate this new chapter of our lives. I found a simple but elegant dress at a boutique in Scottsdale, spending more money on clothing than I had in years. Bob insisted on paying for the reception dinner at a nice restaurant, though he was careful not to choose anywhere too ostentatious. We wanted the day to be about us, about our love and commitment, not about displaying wealth or making statements. The hardest part was keeping the secret from my family. Danny called twice during the planning period, and Sophia stopped by my apartment once to drop off some photos she'd had printed. Each time, I had to work to act normal, to not let my excitement and nervousness show. I was terrified that someone would figure out what I was planning before I was ready to reveal it. Maggie was my closest confidant during this time, helping with details and providing moral support when I had moments of doubt. "Are you sure about this, Linda?" she asked one afternoon as we addressed wedding invitations at my kitchen table. "Not about marrying Bob. That man is crazy about you and anyone can see it. But are you sure about not telling your kids beforehand?" "I'm sure," I said, and I was surprised by the certainty in my voice. "Maggie, if I tell them in advance, what do you think will happen?" She considered this. "Mike will try to talk you out of it. He'll say you're moving too fast, that you don't know Bob well enough, that you're making a mistake." "Exactly. And Ashley will research Bob online, try to find out about his finances, and probably accuse him of being a gold digger or me of being a fool. Danny will stay quiet but disapproving, and Sophia will worry about family drama and try to convince me to wait until everyone can get used to the idea. And none of them will consider whether you're happy or whether this is what you want. Right. They'll make it about them, about their comfort level, about their concerns. Just like the birthday party. My feelings, my desires, my judgment. None of that will matter as much as their opinions about what I should do." I sealed another envelope and added it to the stack. I've spent 8 years letting them make decisions about my life or influence decisions I should be making myself. I'm done with that. The week before the wedding, something happened that almost made me reconsider the secrecy. Sophia called, sounding genuinely concerned about me. "Mom, I've been thinking about your birthday situation, and I want you to know that I think Mike handled it poorly. Even if they needed to change the venue or scale back the party, he should have discussed it with you instead of just announcing a decision." Her words were like a balm to the hurt I'd been carrying. Finally, someone in my family was acknowledging that my feelings mattered, that I deserved better treatment than I'd received. "Thank you for saying that, Sophia. It means more than you know. I was thinking maybe Kevin and I could plan something special for your birthday instead. Nothing elaborate, but something that shows we value you and want to celebrate." For a moment, I was tempted to tell her everything. Sophia was the most emotionally intelligent of my children, the one most likely to understand why I was making the choices I was making. But I held back, partly because I knew she would worry about family repercussions, and partly because I wanted to follow through with my original plan. "That's very sweet of you, honey, but don't worry about it. I'm actually planning something special for myself this year." "Oh? What kind of something?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, smiling to myself. 3 days before the wedding, Bob took me to dinner at the most expensive restaurant in Phoenix. It was the first time he'd chosen somewhere truly upscale, and I understood it was his way of preparing me for the reality of his wealth, of showing me what our life together might look like. The restaurant was beautiful, with white tablecloths, crystal stemware, and a view of the city lights. The other diners were clearly affluent, and I felt momentarily out of place in my simple dress and department store shoes. But Bob was attentive and loving, treating me like I belonged in that environment, like I was worthy of such luxury. "Are you nervous about Saturday?" he asked as we shared an expensive bottle of wine. "Terrified," I admitted. "Not about marrying, That's the one thing I'm completely sure about. But about what comes after, when my family finds out. We don't have to tell them immediately, Bob said. We could wait until after Mike gets back from Italy, or until you feel ready to handle their reactions. I shook my head. No, I want to tell them right away. I want them to know that while they were dismissing me and taking me for granted, I was building a life that has nothing to do with their expectations or approval. And when they find out about my financial situation, that was the question I'd been avoiding, the complication that made everything more complex. Once my family discovered I'd married a billionaire, they would never believe the relationship was genuine. They would assume I was after his money, or that he was taking advantage of me, or that I'd been deceiving them about my financial struggles. Let me ask you something, I said. How much of your wealth are you planning to share with me? Bob looked surprised by the question. Linda, once we're married, everything I have is ours. I'm not looking for a prenup or trying to protect my assets from you. I want us to be true partners in every sense. Then they'll definitely think I married you for your money. Does that bother you? I thought about it seriously. It should bother me. It should hurt to know that my own children think so little of me that they'd assume I'm capable of marrying someone for financial gain. But honestly, Bob, I'm more hurt by the fact that they'll be upset about not getting advance notice than they will be happy about my happiness. You really think that's how they'll react? I know that's how they'll react. They'll be angry that I made a major life decision without consulting them, worried about how it affects their inheritance prospects, and suspicious of your motives. None of them will start by asking if I'm happy or if you're good to me. The conversation left me feeling sad, but also more determined than ever to follow through with our plans. I was making this decision based on love, on the desire to spend my remaining years with someone who valued and cherished me. If my family couldn't understand or support that, it said more about them than it did about me. On Friday night, the evening before our wedding, I sat in my small apartment for the last time as a single woman. I'd packed most of my belongings, and Bob and I had decided I would move into his apartment after the honeymoon. Eventually, we would find a house together, something that reflected both of our personalities and preferences. I called each of my children to say goodnight, knowing it was the last time I would speak to them as the woman they thought I was, the quiet, manageable widow who lived for their occasional attention. Tomorrow, I would become someone else entirely. A newlywed, a partner in a loving relationship, a woman who had chosen her own happiness over everyone else's comfort. Good night, Mike, I said when he answered his phone. Have a wonderful time in Italy. I love you. Thanks, Mom. Are you okay? You sound different. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I'll talk to you when you get back. Similar conversations with Danny and Sophia, both of whom commented that I sounded unusually cheerful and energetic. If only they knew that in less than 24 hours, their understanding of who their mother was would be completely upended. As I prepared for bed, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that reminded me of being young again. Tomorrow, I would marry a man who saw me as worthy of love and partnership. Tomorrow, I would step into a new life that I had chosen, for myself, without asking permission or seeking approval from anyone else. For the first time in 8 years, I was about to do something purely for my own happiness. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but mostly, it felt like waking up after a very long sleep. Part 4. Refusal of the call and meeting. The mentor. The morning of my wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect Arizona sunshine that made everything seem possible. I woke up at 5:30, far earlier than necessary, but my mind was racing with excitement and last-minute nerves. As I made coffee in my small kitchen, I found myself thinking about Carlos, wondering what he would think about this decision I was making. Carlos had been a good man, a loving husband, and I'd grieved him deeply when he died. But if I was honest with myself, our marriage had been traditional in ways that sometimes left me feeling diminished. He'd made the major decisions, controlled the finances, and expected me to support his choices without question. I'd accepted that dynamic because it was what I'd been raised to expect from marriage, but it had also meant that I'd never fully developed my own sense of independence or self-worth. Now, at 62, I was about to marry a man who treated me as an equal partner, who valued my opinions and encouraged my growth. The contrast was striking, and it made me realize how much I'd changed in the months since meeting Bob. But as I showered and began preparing for the day, doubt crept in around the edges of my excitement. Was I making a mistake by not telling my children? Was I being vindictive rather than simply independent? Would they ever forgive me for excluding them from such an important moment in my life? I called Maggie, needing to hear a friendly voice, before the ceremony. "Linda, honey, are you having second thoughts?" "Not about marrying Bob," I said quickly, "but about the way I'm handling it with my family. Maybe I should have included them, or at least given them some warning." "Let me stop you right there," Maggie said firmly. "When Mike canceled your birthday party, did he give you any warning? Did he ask how you felt about it or consider your preferences?" "No. When your kids make decisions about holiday plans or family gatherings, do they consult you first or just inform you after the fact?" I thought about the pattern of communication in our family relationships. "They inform me." "So, why should you handle your wedding any differently than they handle decisions that affect you? Why should you extend courtesy they've never shown you?" Her words helped settle some of my anxiety. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about claiming the same autonomy my adult children had always assumed for themselves. "Besides," Maggie continued, "think about what would have happened if you'd told them in advance. Mike would have tried to talk you out of it. Ashley would have wanted to plan everything according to her taste, and they all would have made this about them rather than about you and Bob. You did the right thing." By 9 o'clock, I was dressed and ready, wearing the elegant navy blue dress I'd chosen and the pearl earrings that had been my mother's. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone I barely recognized, a confident, radiant woman who was about to embark on a new adventure rather than the tired, defeated person I'd become in recent years. Bob arrived at 10 to drive me to the church, and when I opened the door, his face lit up with such joy and admiration that any remaining doubts disappeared. "Linda, you're absolutely beautiful," he said, offering me his arm. "Are you ready to become Mrs. Wellington?" I've never been more ready for anything in my life. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. St. Anthony's was a small, traditional Catholic church with beautiful stained glass windows and wooden pews that had seen decades of weddings, baptisms, and funerals. Father Rodriguez, who had officiated at countless family celebrations over the years, spoke about love as a choice we make daily, about partnership as a sacred commitment to support each other's growth and happiness. Our small group of friends filled the first 2 pews, and their faces reflected genuine joy for our happiness. These were people who had watched our relationship develop, who had seen how Bob and I brought out the best in each other, who understood that this marriage was built on love and mutual respect rather than convenience or desperation. When Bob and I exchanged vows, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't experienced in years. We promised to honor each other's independence while building a life together, to support each other's dreams and aspirations, to treat each other with kindness and respect even during difficult times. These weren't generic wedding vows. They were specific commitments based on what we'd learned about ourselves and each other during our courtship. The reception dinner was held at a lovely restaurant downtown, intimate and elegant without being ostentatious. Bob had arranged for a private dining room where our small group could celebrate without outside distractions. The conversation was lively and warm, filled with stories about how Bob and I had met, predictions for our future happiness, and gentle teasing about our whirlwind romance. During dinner, Bob's brother David stood to make a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "I've known Bob for 67 years. David said, raising his wine glass. And I've never seen him as happy as he's been since meeting Linda. For the past 3 years, since Margaret died, I've watched my brother go through the motions of living without really engaging with life. But Linda changed that. She brought back his laughter, his curiosity, his sense of adventure. Bob, you're lucky to have found her. Linda, you're getting a man who will spend every day trying to be worthy of your love. As the afternoon turned to evening, I felt surrounded by warmth and support in ways I hadn't experienced in years. These people, Maggie, the librarians from work, Bob's family, our book club friends, had become my chosen family. The people who saw my worth and celebrated my happiness without reservation or hidden agendas. Around 6 o'clock, as we were preparing to leave for our brief honeymoon weekend at a resort in Sedona, my phone buzzed with a text message. Sophia was checking in, probably wondering why I hadn't answered her earlier call. Mom, just wanted to say hi and see how your day went. Love you. I stared at the message, feeling the weight of the secret I was carrying. In a few days, I would have to tell my children what I'd done, and their reactions would likely change our relationships forever. But looking around at the people who had celebrated with Bob and me, I realized I was no longer willing to sacrifice my happiness for their comfort. I texted back simply, "Had a wonderful day. We'll call you tomorrow with some news." The honeymoon weekend in Sedona was magical. Bob had reserved a suite at a luxury resort nestled among the red rocks, and for 3 days, we existed in a bubble of newlywed bliss. We hiked scenic trails, enjoyed spa treatments, shared leisurely meals on our private balcony, and talked for hours about our hopes and dreams for this new chapter of our lives together. It was during one of these conversations that Bob revealed more details about his wealth and what it might mean for our future. "Linda, I want you to understand the full scope of what you've married into," he said as we watched the sunset paint, the red rocks in brilliant oranges and purples. Wellington Industries was more successful than I think I ever fully grasped while I was running it. When I sold the company, the final valuation was just over $800 million. I nearly choked on my wine. 800 million? The investments I've made since then have performed well. My current net worth is approximately $1.2 billion. I set down my wine glass and stared at him. 1.2 billion. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. It was more money than I could truly comprehend. "Bob, I need you to understand something," I said carefully. "I had no idea about any of this when I proposed to you. I fell in love with the man who comes to book club and asks thoughtful questions about novels. The man who encouraged me to take writing classes and treated me like my opinions mattered. I didn't marry you for money I didn't even know existed." "I know that," he said, reaching for my hand. "That's exactly why I fell in love with you. You saw me as Bob, not as the Wellington Industries fortune. You valued me for who I am as a person. But my family won't see it that way." "Probably not," he agreed. "But Linda, does their opinion really matter more than your happiness?" It was a question I'd been asking myself repeatedly over the past few weeks. Did their opinion matter more than my happiness? For most of my adult life, the answer would have been yes. I'd prioritized my children's comfort, their approval, their needs over my own desires so consistently that I'd almost forgotten I had the right to make choices, based purely on what I wanted. "No," I said finally. "Their opinion doesn't matter more than my happiness. But I love them, Bob. Despite everything, despite the way they've treated me, I love my children, and I want them to be part of our life together." "Then we'll work to make that happen," Bob said. "But on terms that respect both of us, not just their expectations." When we returned to Phoenix on Monday evening, reality began to set in. I moved my belongings into Bob's apartment, which I discovered was much larger and more luxurious than he'd initially let on. The building was one of the most exclusive high-rises in the city, and his penthouse unit had floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the valley. "You said you lived in a small apartment," I said, walking through the spacious living room with its expensive furniture and original artwork. Bob looked embarrassed. "I suppose small is relative. Compared to the house I lived in with Margaret, this felt compact. But you're right, I wasn't entirely honest about my living situation." "What else haven't you been entirely honest about?" "The house," he admitted. "I still own the house in Paradise Valley. 22,000 square feet on 12 acres. I couldn't bring myself to sell it after Margaret died, but I couldn't stand living there either. Too many memories, too much space for one person." I was beginning to understand the true magnitude of the life I'd stepped into. This wasn't just about having more money than I'd ever imagined. It was about entering a completely different social and economic class with expectations and obligations I knew nothing about. "Bob, I need you to show me everything. The house, the investments, the business interests, all of it. If we're going to be true partners, I need to understand what we're dealing with." Over the next few days, Bob gave me a comprehensive education in wealth management. We visited the Paradise Valley estate, a stunning property that looked like something from a magazine. We met with his financial advisors, lawyers, and accountants. I learned about charitable foundations, investment portfolios, and the complex web of holdings that comprised his fortune. It was overwhelming and intimidating, but also strangely empowering. For the first time in my life, I had resources that could make a real difference in the world. I could help people, support causes I cared about, ensure that my grandchildren's education would never be a financial burden for their parents. But I also understood that this information would fundamentally change how my family saw me and our relationship. Once they learned about Bob's wealth, they would never again be able to dismiss me as the poor widow who needed their charity or management. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after our wedding, I decided it was time to tell my children. Mike and Ashley were scheduled to return from Italy the following day, and I wanted everyone to learn the news at the same time. I called each of them and asked them to come to dinner on Saturday evening. I told them I had important news to share and that it was crucial they all be there. Danny and Sophia agreed immediately, both sounding curious and slightly concerned. When I called Mike's house to leave a message, Ashley answered, "Linda, thank goodness you called. We just got back from the most amazing trip. Italy was absolutely incredible, and the kids had such educational experiences. We have hundreds of photos to show you." "I'm glad you had a wonderful time," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I called to invite you and Mike to dinner on Saturday evening. I have some news to share with the family." "What kind of news? You sound different. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I just need everyone together to discuss some changes in my life." "Changes? Mom, you're worrying me. What's going on?" "Nothing to worry about, Ashley. Just some positive developments I want to share with everyone at once." After I hung up, I realized how much my confidence had grown in just the past week. 8 days ago, I would have felt obligated to explain myself to Ashley, to reassure her and provide details until she was satisfied. Now, I simply stated what I needed and ended the conversation on my terms. Saturday afternoon, I spent several hours preparing dinner for my family. Bob had offered to cook or hire a caterer, but I wanted to do this myself. It felt important to show them that I was still the same person who had cooked thousands of meals for them over the years, even though other aspects of my life had changed dramatically. I prepared Carlos's favorite meal, enchiladas with homemade sauce, Spanish rice, and refried beans. It was comfort food, familiar and warm, designed to put everyone at ease before I delivered news that would upend their understanding of their mother's life. Bob arrived an hour before the family was expected, carrying flowers and wine, dressed casually but elegantly. Looking at him in my small kitchen, helping me set the table and prepare drinks, I felt a surge of happiness and gratitude. This was what partnership looked like: shared responsibilities, mutual support, someone who showed up when they said they would and contributed without being asked. "Are you nervous?" he asked as we put the finishing touches on the dining room. "Terrified," I admitted, but also excited. For the first time in years, I'm going to tell my children something about my life instead of just listening to them tell me about theirs. Danny arrived first at exactly 6 o'clock, punctual as always. He hugged me warmly and shook hands with Bob, who I introduced as my dear friend from book club. Danny was polite but curious, clearly wondering why this man was present for a family dinner. Sophia and Kevin came next, bringing a bottle of wine and flowers. Sophia looked beautiful and happy, and she gave me one of her genuine hugs that reminded me why she'd always been my favorite, though I'd never admitted that to anyone. "Mom, you look incredible," she said, stepping back to study my face. "There's something different about you. You seem, I don't know, younger somehow." "Thank you, sweetheart. I've been feeling good lately." Mike and Ashley arrived 20 minutes late, bustling in with energy and expensive luggage still piled in their car. They looked tanned and relaxed, clearly having enjoyed their Italian vacation immensely. "Mom, you should see the photos from Rome," Ashley announced immediately. "The kids were so well behaved and they learned so much history. It was exactly the kind of educational experience we hoped for." "I'm sure it was wonderful," I replied, accepting their hugs and ushering everyone to the dining room. As we sat down to eat, the conversation naturally turned to Mike and Ashley's trip. They regaled us with stories about museums, restaurants, and historical sites, showing photos on Ashley's phone and describing expenses that made me wince internally. $25,000 for a week-long vacation seemed even more excessive when I heard the details, but I kept my thoughts to myself. "The best part," Mike said, helping himself to seconds, "was that we didn't have to worry about anyone else's needs or preferences. Just our little family, doing exactly what we wanted when we wanted to do it." The irony of his statement, given that they'd canceled my birthday party to afford this trip, was not lost on me. But instead of feeling hurt, I felt sorry for him. Mike had no idea how callous he sounded, how his words revealed the selfishness that had become his default mode of operation. After dinner, as we cleared the dishes and prepared for dessert, Sophia asked the question I'd been expecting. "So, Mom, what's this important news you wanted to share? And who is Bob, really? You introduced him as a friend, but he seems very comfortable in your home." I looked around the dining room at my 3 children and their spouses, these adults who had been the center of my world for so many years. In a few minutes, their understanding of who I was and what my life looked like would be completely transformed. "Actually," I said, my heart pounding, "Bob is more than a friend. Much more." The room fell silent. I could see confusion on their faces and something that might have been concern. "We met 8 months ago at the library book club," I continued, taking Bob's hand in mine. "We became friends, then began dating, and last Saturday we got married." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched their faces change from confusion to shock to something approaching disbelief. Danny was the first to speak. "Married? Mom, did you say married?" "Yes. Bob and I were married last Saturday at St. Anthony's. Father Rodriguez performed the ceremony." "Last Saturday," Sophia repeated slowly, "while Mike and Ashley were in Italy." "Yes." Ashley was staring at me with her mouth slightly open. "You got married and didn't tell us? Didn't invite us?" "We had a small ceremony with close friends. It was exactly what we wanted." Mike's face was flushing red, the way it did when he was angry. "Mom, this is insane. You can't just get married without telling your family. We're your children." "You're my adult children," I corrected gently, "and I can make decisions about my own life without needing your permission or approval." "Permission?" Mike's voice was rising. "This isn't about permission. It's about respect, about keeping your family informed about major life changes. Like the way you kept me informed about canceling my birthday party? I asked quietly. The room fell, silent again. Everyone understood the reference, and I could see the uncomfortable recognition on their faces. That's completely different, Ashley said quickly. That was a party, not a life-altering decision like marriage. It was my birthday party, I said firmly, and it was canceled without any discussion with me, the person most affected by the decision. You made a choice that impacted me and then informed me after the fact. How is what I did any different? Bob squeezed my hand supportively but remained quiet, letting me handle the conversation with my family. Mom, Sophia said gently, I understand why you might be upset about the birthday party situation, but getting married is huge. We don't even know Bob. How long have you been dating? What do we know about his background? We've been together for 8 months, and I know everything I need to know about his character. He's kind, intelligent, respectful, and he treats me like an equal partner. He's widowed, like me, and we have similar values and interests. What does he do for work? Danny asked. Where does he live? Does he have children? I looked at Bob, who nodded slightly, giving me permission to share whatever information I thought appropriate. Bob is retired from the manufacturing business. He has no children but was married for 38 years before his wife died of cancer. He's financially secure and lives here in Phoenix. Financially secure how? Mike asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Mom, I hope you realize that older women are often targets for financial scams. Men who prey on lonely widows. And stop, I interrupted, feeling anger rise in my chest. Just stop right there, Mike. I am not a lonely, desperate widow who can be easily manipulated. I am an intelligent adult woman who is perfectly capable of making decisions about relationships. But Mom, Ashley interjected, you have to understand how this looks. You've been alone for 8 years, you have limited financial resources, and suddenly you're married to someone we've never met. Of course we're concerned. Concerned about what, exactly? About you being taken advantage of, Mike said. About someone marrying you for the wrong reasons. I almost laughed at the irony. If only they knew the truth about Bob's financial situation, they would understand how ridiculous their concerns were. And what would the right reasons be for someone to marry me? I asked. What could I possibly offer that would make me worth marrying for legitimate reasons? My question hung in the air, and I could see that they didn't have a good answer. In their minds, I was a poor, aging widow with nothing to offer except whatever small inheritance might eventually come from my modest savings. The idea that someone might marry me for love, companionship, and genuine partnership seemed beyond their comprehension. That's not what we meant, Sophia said quickly, but her tone suggested she knew exactly how their words had sounded. Actually, I think that's exactly what you meant, I replied. You can't imagine why anyone would want to marry me unless they were after something, because you've forgotten that I'm a person worth loving for who I am. Bob finally spoke up. If I may, he said quietly, I'd like to say something to all of you. The room turned to him, and I could see the wariness in my children's faces. They were prepared to dislike him, to find fault with whatever he said. I understand your concerns about your mother's well-being, Bob continued. If I had children and they heard that I'd suddenly married someone they'd never met, I would expect them to have questions and reservations. But I want you to know that I love Linda deeply, and I married her because she's an extraordinary woman who has brought joy and meaning back into my life. That's exactly what someone with ulterior motives would say, Ashley muttered. Ashley, I said sharply, that's enough. You will not disrespect my husband in my home. My husband. The words felt strange but wonderful coming out of my mouth. I was no longer just Mike's mother, or Sophia's mother, or Danny's mother. I was Bob Wellington's wife, a woman with an identity that existed independently of my role as their parent. "Look," Danny said, clearly trying to be the peacemaker, "I think we're all just surprised by this news. Mom, if you're happy, then we're happy for you. But you have to understand that this is a lot to process." "I do understand that," I said, feeling some of my anger ease. "And I'm sorry if the timing or the way you found out was difficult. But Danny, I need you all to understand something important. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, or even 6 months ago. I've been growing and changing and rediscovering parts of myself that I thought were gone forever." I looked around, the table at their faces, confused, concerned, still somewhat skeptical, but beginning to show signs of acceptance. Bob has shown me what it feels like to be valued as a complete person, not just as someone's mother or grandmother. He listens to my opinions, encourages my interests, and treats me like an equal partner. I'd forgotten what that felt like, and I'm not willing to give it up to make anyone else more comfortable. The conversation continued for another hour, with questions about our relationship, our future plans, and our expectations for how Bob would fit into the family dynamic. Gradually, I could see my children beginning to adjust to this new reality, though I knew it would take time for them to fully accept the changes. As the evening wound down and everyone prepared to leave, Sophia pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Mom, I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "About the birthday party, about the way we've been treating you, about not seeing that you were unhappy. I'm sorry it took you getting married for us to realize that we haven't been very good at considering your feelings." Her words brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. That means everything to me." "I like Bob," she added. "He seems genuine, and I can see how he looks at you, like you're precious to him." After everyone left, Bob and I sat in my small living room, processing the evening's events. "That went better than I expected," I said, leaning against his shoulder. "They love you," Bob observed. "They're protective and confused, but they love you. Once they get to know me and see how happy we are together, they'll come around." "There's something else they need to know," I said, "about your financial situation. It's going to come out eventually, and when it does, everything they think they understand about our relationship will change again. Are you ready for that conversation?" I thought about Mike's assumptions about my vulnerability, about Ashley's suspicions of Bob's motives, about their difficulty believing anyone would marry me for love alone. "Yes," I said finally, "I'm ready, because the truth is always better than letting people make their own assumptions." Part 5. Crossing the Threshold. The following Tuesday, I made a decision that would eliminate any remaining doubt about the seriousness of my transformation. I walked into the Phoenix Public Library and submitted my resignation, effective at the end of the month. My supervisor, Mrs. Patterson, was shocked. "Linda, you've been here for 6 years. You're one of our most reliable employees. Is everything all right?" "Everything is wonderful," I replied, and I meant it. "I'm starting a new chapter of my life, and it's time for me to move on to different opportunities." The truth was that I no longer needed the income from my part-time job, and I wanted to explore other ways to spend my time and energy. Bob and I had been discussing the possibility of starting a foundation to support literacy programs and educational opportunities for older adults. I was excited about the prospect of using our resources to make a real difference in people's lives. That afternoon, I drove to Maricopa Community College and enrolled in 4 additional classes for the fall semester: nonprofit management, grant writing, public speaking, and introduction to philanthropy. If I was going to be managing significant charitable resources, I wanted to do it competently and effectively. Bob was delighted when I told him about my career change and educational plans. "Linda, I love seeing you think big about your future. Margaret was involved in several charitable organizations, and it brought her tremendous satisfaction. I think you'd be brilliant at this kind of work. We spent the evening discussing possibilities for our foundation. I was particularly interested in supporting literacy programs, given my experience at the library, and Bob was enthusiastic about funding educational opportunities for people who had been overlooked or underestimated by traditional systems. What if we focused on women over 50 who want to go back to school or start new careers? I suggested. Women like me, who spent decades taking care of everyone else and are just now discovering what they want to do with their own lives. That's perfect, Bob said. We could provide scholarships, mentorship programs, career counseling, whatever, would remove the barriers that keep women from pursuing their dreams. As we talked, I felt a sense of purpose and excitement I hadn't experienced in years. This was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. Use our good fortune to help other women discover their own worth and potential. On Friday afternoon, I received a phone call that would accelerate my timeline for revealing the full truth about my new circumstances. It was Danny, and he sounded troubled. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. What's wrong? I did some research on Bob Wellington, online, through professional databases, public records. Mom, I can't find much information about him, and what I did find doesn't make sense. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? I mean, there are references to a Robert Wellington who owned Wellington Industries, a huge manufacturing company that was sold a few years ago for an enormous amount of money. But that can't be the same Bob you married, right? Because that Bob Wellington would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I closed my eyes, knowing that the moment of complete truth had arrived sooner than I'd planned. Danny, I think you should come over this evening. Bring Sophia and Kevin if you can reach them. There are some things about Bob that I haven't told you yet. Mom, you're scaring me. Is Bob the Wellington Industries Bob? Yes, I said quietly. He is. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Mom, Danny finally said, we need to talk. Tonight. By 7 o'clock, Danny, Sophia, and Kevin were sitting in my living room, looking at Bob and me with expressions ranging from confusion to concern to something approaching awe. Before anyone says anything, I began, I want you to understand that I had no knowledge of Bob's financial situation when I fell in love with him. None. I thought he was a retired middle-class widower, just like he wanted me to think. I told them about Bob's decision to live modestly after his wife's death, about his desire to be known for who he was rather than what he owned, about how our relationship had developed based on shared interests and genuine compatibility. So, when you married him, Sophia said slowly, you had no idea he was a billionaire. Billionaire? Kevin repeated faintly. Bob nodded. My current net worth is approximately $1.2 billion. The room fell silent again. I watched. My children processed this information, and I could see their mental calculations spinning wildly. Mom, Danny said carefully, do you understand what this means? It means I married a man I love who happens to be very wealthy, I replied. It doesn't change who I am or why I made the decisions I made. But it changes everything else, Sophia said. Your financial security, your lifestyle, your options for the future. Yes, it does. Bob and I are planning to use our resources to start a charitable foundation focused on educational opportunities for women. I'm going back to school to learn about nonprofit management so I can run it effectively. You're going back to school? Danny asked. I enrolled in classes this week. I also resigned from the library. I'm starting a completely new career in philanthropy. I could see them struggling to reconcile this information with their image of me as the quiet, predictable widow who needed their management and guidance. Mom, Sophia said gently, I have to ask, are you sure Bob's motivations are genuine? When someone has that much money, relationships can get complicated. Sophia, honey, what could Bob possibly want from me? I have virtually nothing compared to what he already owns. If he wanted a woman for her money or social connections, he could have chosen from hundreds of wealthier, more prominent candidates. Maybe he wanted someone who wouldn't challenge him about money, Danny suggested. Someone who would be grateful and manageable. Bob laughed at that. Have you met your mother? She's about as manageable as a hurricane. Linda challenges me constantly about my assumptions, my habits, my tendency to be too generous with people who don't deserve it. She's made me a better person, and she certainly doesn't let me get away with anything just because I have money. The truth is, I added, Bob has been encouraging me to be more assertive, more demanding, more willing to put my own needs first. He's the one who suggested I go back to school, who supported my decision to resign from the library, who helped me realize that I'd been making myself too small for everyone else's comfort. We talked for another 2 hours, covering everything. From prenups to future living arrangements to how Bob's wealth might affect our family dynamics. By the end of the evening, I could see that Danny and Sophia were beginning to understand and accept the magnitude of the changes in my life. There's one more thing, I said as they prepared to leave. We haven't told Mike and Ashley about Bob's financial situation yet. I want all of you to hear this information at the same time, so please don't mention it until we can have another family dinner. When are you planning to tell them? Sophia asked. This weekend. I think it's time for complete honesty all around. After they left, Bob and I sat on the couch, emotionally drained but relieved to have shared the truth with at least part of my family. How do you think Mike and Ashley will react? Bob asked. I think Ashley will be excited about the social implications and the potential for an upgraded lifestyle. Mike will be suspicious and probably angry that I kept such significant information from him. And how do you feel about their potential reactions? I considered the question seriously. 3 months ago, Mike's anger or Ashley's judgment would have sent me into a panic of guilt and self-doubt. I would have apologized, explained, and tried to manage their emotions at the expense of my own well-being. I feel like their reactions are their responsibility to manage, I said finally. I can't control how they feel about my choices, and I'm not going to sacrifice my happiness to avoid their discomfort. The woman who said those words was completely different from the woman who had meekly accepted the cancellation of her birthday party just a few weeks earlier. That woman had been afraid of disappointing her children, afraid of asserting her own needs, afraid of taking up too much space in their lives. This woman, Mrs. Robert Wellington, future philanthropist, college student at 62, was not afraid of those things anymore. This woman had discovered that she was worthy of love, respect, and partnership. She had learned that her opinions mattered, her dreams were valid, and her happiness was just as important as anyone else's. The transformation was complete, and there was no going back. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of inevitability. I had spent the afternoon preparing another family dinner, this time with the knowledge that by the end of the night, every secret would be revealed, and every relationship would be forever changed. Bob helped me arrange the dining room, his presence, calm and reassuring as I battled waves of nervousness about what was to come. Are you ready for this? He asked, as we set out the good china I rarely used anymore. I don't think anyone can be ready for the conversation we're about to have, I replied, smoothing the tablecloth with hands that trembled slightly. But I'm tired of secrets, tired of managing everyone else's emotions while ignoring my own needs. Mike and Ashley arrived first, Ashley carrying a large photo album from their Italy trip, and Mike looking slightly impatient, as if this family dinner was an inconvenience in his busy schedule. They both seemed surprised to see Bob again, and I could tell they'd been discussing him extensively since our last gathering. Mom, we need to talk about some concerns we have, Ashley announced before even sitting down. About Bob, about this, marriage, about the decisions you've been making. We'll have plenty of time to talk about everything, I said calmly. Let's wait until everyone arrives. Danny and Sophia came together, having coordinated their arrival time. I could see the knowledge of Bob's wealth in their eyes, the careful way they looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. They had honored my request not to reveal what they knew, but the tension was visible in their posture. Kevin looked uncomfortable, as he always did during family gatherings that promised conflict. He settled into his chair with the resigned expression of someone who knew he was about to witness drama but had no power to prevent it. As we began eating, Ashley launched into an enthusiastic recap of their Italian vacation, showing photos and describing experiences with the kind of detail that suggested she expected us to be deeply interested in every gelato flavor they'd tried and every museum they'd visited. The educational value for the children was incredible, she said, scrolling through dozens of photos on her phone. Emma wrote a 10-page report about Roman architecture, and Jake learned so much about Renaissance art. It was exactly the kind of investment in their future that we hoped it would be. Investment in their future. The same language Mike had used when explaining why they'd canceled my birthday party. I noticed Bob's slight frown at Ashley's tone, the subtle way he was evaluating my family's dynamics and communication patterns. I'm glad the children enjoyed it, I said neutrally. It sounds like you all created wonderful memories together. We did, Mike said, helping himself to more food. And honestly, Mom, it made us realize how important it is to prioritize experiences like that. Ashley and I have been talking about making international travel a regular part of the kids' education. More expensive vacations were being planned, apparently. I wondered if they would continue to fund these trips by canceling other people's celebrations, or if they had learned anything from the birthday party incident. That's an ambitious goal, Bob commented mildly. International travel can be quite expensive, especially with children. Ashley looked at him sharply. We manage our finances carefully. Mike has built a very successful insurance practice, and my real estate career has been quite profitable. There was something defensive in her tone, as if she felt the need to establish their financial credentials in front of Bob. I realized they were still trying to figure out his economic status, still operating under the assumption that he was a middle-class retiree who might be intimidated by their affluent lifestyle. I'm sure you do very well, Bob replied diplomatically. Linda has mentioned how successful both of you are. The conversation continued through dinner, with Mike and Ashley dominating the discussion with talk of their business achievements, their social activities, and their plans for future luxury purchases. Danny and Sophia contributed occasionally, but I could see they were waiting for the moment when the real conversation would begin. As I served dessert, Mike finally addressed what he clearly considered the elephant in the room. Mom, Ashley, and I have been doing some thinking about your situation since our last conversation. About the marriage, about the decisions you've been making. What kind of thinking? We're concerned, Ashley jumped in, about the speed of everything, about how little we really know about Bob, about whether you're making choices based on emotions rather than practical considerations. I set down the dessert plates and looked at my eldest son and his wife. What practical considerations do you think I should be prioritizing? Your financial security, for one thing, Mike said. Mom, you're living on a limited income from Dad's pension and your part-time job. If this marriage doesn't work out, what happens to you? Have you thought about protecting yourself legally? Are you suggesting I need a prenup? Maybe, Ashley said. I mean, it's awkward to discuss, but older people getting remarried should think about asset protection, inheritance planning, that sort of thing. I almost laughed at the irony. They were worried about protecting my modest assets from Bob, when in reality, Bob's wealth dwarfed anything they could imagine. Their concern about my financial vulnerability was touching in its way, but also deeply misguided. What assets exactly do you think I need to protect? I asked. Mike looked uncomfortable. Well, there's the money from Dad's life insurance. Your savings. Whatever inheritance you might eventually leave to us and the grandchildren. We just want to make sure you're not being taken advantage of. And what makes you think Bob might be taking advantage of me? Mom, come on. Ashley said impatiently. You meet a man at the library, date him for a few months, and suddenly you're married? That's exactly how financial predators operate. They target lonely older women with some assets and sweep them off their feet. Lonely older women, I repeated slowly. Is that how you see me? We see you as someone who's been alone for 8 years and might be vulnerable to someone who pays attention to you, Mike said. There's nothing wrong with that, but it means you might not be thinking clearly about his motivations. I looked around the table at my family. Danny and Sophia were shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, knowing what Mike and Ashley didn't know. Kevin was studying his dessert as if it might provide an escape route from the increasingly tense conversation. Bob was listening quietly, his expression neutral but alert. Let me ask you something, I said to Mike and Ashley. In your opinion, what could Bob possibly want from me? What do I have that would make me worth targeting for financial gain? They exchanged glances, clearly realizing they'd walked into an uncomfortable territory. Mom, that's not the point, Ashley said quickly. Even modest assets can be attractive to someone who has nothing. So you assume Bob has nothing? We assume he has less than you do, Mike said. Otherwise, why would he be interested in a woman your age with your limited resources? The casual cruelty of his words hit me like a physical blow. In Mike's mind, I was so lacking in personal worth that only financial desperation could explain someone's romantic interest in me. I was too old, too poor, too unremarkable to attract genuine love and partnership. I see, I said quietly. So, in your estimation, the only reason someone would marry me is for whatever small amount of money I might have. That's not what we meant, Sophia said quickly, shooting a warning look at her brother. Actually, I think that's exactly what they meant, I replied. They can't conceive of anyone finding me attractive, interesting, or worthy of love for my own sake. The only possible explanation for Bob's interest must be financial. Mom, you're twisting our words, Ashley protested. We're just trying to look out for your best interests. My best interests, I repeated. The way you looked out for my best interests when you canceled my birthday party for your vacation? The room fell silent. Mike's face flushed, and Ashley looked genuinely taken aback by the direct reference to what had started this entire chain of events. That was different, Mike said defensively. That was about budget priorities and practical decisions. It was about you deciding that your wants were more important than my feelings, I corrected. Just like this conversation is about you, deciding that your assumptions are more important than my judgment. Bob finally spoke up. If I may, he said gently. I think there are some things you should know about my background before we continue this discussion. All eyes turned to him, and I could see the mixture of curiosity and suspicion on Mike and Ashley's faces. I wasn't entirely forthcoming about my circumstances when we first met, Bob continued. Not with Linda, and certainly not with all of you. After my wife died, I made a conscious decision to live simply and quietly, without the complications that come with significant wealth. Significant wealth? Ashley repeated, her voice sharp with interest. I owned a manufacturing company called Wellington Industries. Perhaps you've heard of it. I watched Mike's face as recognition dawned. As a successful insurance agent, he would certainly be familiar with major corporations and their owners. Wellington Industries, Mike said slowly. The company that was sold a few years ago for $800 million, Bob confirmed. Plus, my investments since then have performed well. My current net worth is approximately $1.2 billion. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Ashley's mouth literally fell open. Mike stared at Bob as if he'd just announced he was from another planet. Even Kevin, who rarely showed strong reactions to anything, looked stunned. "Did you say billion?" Ashley whispered. "With a B?" "Yes." I watched my family process this information, and I could see their mental calculations spinning wildly. Everything they thought they knew about the situation had just been turned upside down. "Mom," Mike said faintly, "did you know about this when you married him?" "No," I replied firmly. I had no idea about Bob's wealth until after we were engaged. I fell in love with him believing he was a retired middle-class widower, just like he wanted me to believe. "But you know now," Ashley said, her voice taking on a different tone entirely. "You know now, and you're married to him." "Yes, I know now. And yes, we're married." I could see the wheels turning in Ashley's head, the calculations about social status, lifestyle changes, and access to wealth and influence. The woman who had been concerned about Bob taking advantage of me was now looking at me with something approaching envy. "Mom," she said carefully, "this changes everything. Your financial situation, your social position, your options for the future. It changes some things," I agreed. "But it doesn't change who I am or why I made the decisions I made." "But surely you understand," Mike said, his lawyer mind working, "that this level of wealth comes with responsibilities, complications, legal considerations that you're not prepared for. Which is why I've enrolled in college courses in nonprofit management, public speaking, and philanthropy," I said. "Bob and I are planning to start a charitable foundation focused on educational opportunities for women over 50. "You're going back to college?" Ashley asked, still struggling to process all the revelations. "I am. I'm also leaving my job at the library to focus on running our foundation. I'm starting a completely new career at 62. The transformation in their attitudes was remarkable to witness. The concern about my vulnerability had been replaced by excitement about the opportunities my new status might provide. The warnings about financial predators had given way to eager questions about our future plans. "Mom, this is incredible," Ashley gushed. "Do you realize what this means? The social connections, the influence you could have, the lifestyle you could enjoy? You could live anywhere, travel everywhere, buy anything you want." "Actually," I said quietly, "what it means is that I now have the resources to help other women who are in situations similar to where I was a few months ago, women who feel invisible, undervalued, dismissed by their families, women who have forgotten their own worth because everyone around them has forgotten it too." My words hung in the air, and I could see the uncomfortable recognition on some faces around the table. "Mom," Danny said gently, "are you saying that's how we made you feel?" "I'm saying that's how I felt," I replied. "Whether that was your intention or not, I felt invisible in my own family. I felt like my opinions didn't matter, my feelings could be dismissed, and my presence was more of an obligation than a pleasure for all of you." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never realized." "I know you didn't realize it," I said softly. "That's part of the problem. It's easy to overlook someone when you've been taught to see them as less important, less interesting, less worthy of consideration than everyone else." "But that's not how we see you," Mike protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? Mike, when you canceled my birthday party, did you consider how I might feel about it? Did you ask me what I wanted? Or did you just decide what was best and inform me afterward?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I thought you'd understand. You thought I'd accept it without complaint because that's what I always do. You thought my feelings mattered less than your convenience because that's the dynamic we've all accepted for years." The conversation that followed was unlike any we'd ever had as a family. For the first time in decades, I spoke honestly about feeling marginalized and undervalued. My children were forced to confront the ways they'd unconsciously relegated me to a supporting role in my own life. Danny was the most receptive to what I was saying. Mom, I think you're right. I think we've all gotten so used to you being accommodating and understanding that we stopped considering whether that was fair to ask of you. I don't think we stopped considering it, Sophia added tearfully. I think we never started considering it. We just expected you to be the selfless mother who never needed anything for herself. Mike and Ashley were slower to acknowledge the validity of my feelings, but even they seemed to be processing the uncomfortable truths I was sharing. So, what happens now? Ashley asked. With the family, I mean. How do we move forward from this? We move forward with honesty, I said, with mutual respect, with the understanding that I'm not just your mother. I'm a complete person with my own needs, desires, and boundaries. And with the understanding that I'm part of this family now, Bob added gently. I love Linda, and I want to build positive relationships with all of you. But those relationships need to be based on respect for both of us. The evening ended with tentative steps toward a new dynamic. There were apologies, promises to do better, and acknowledgments that change would take time and effort from everyone. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a beginning. As my family prepared to leave, Ashley pulled me aside. Mom, I owe you an apology for more than just tonight. I've been condescending and dismissive, and I treated you like someone who couldn't manage her own life. I see now that you were managing it just fine. You were just doing it quietly. Her words meant more to me than she probably realized. Ashley had always been the most judgmental of my children's spouses, the one most likely to make me feel inadequate or out of touch. Hearing her acknowledge her behavior was a significant step forward. Mike's apology was more grudging, but seemed genuine. Mom, I still think you could have handled the marriage thing differently, but I understand why you did it the way you did. I'm sorry about the birthday party. That was thoughtless. After everyone left, Bob and I sat in my small apartment, soon to be our former small apartment, and reflected on the evening's revelations. That was intense, Bob said, putting his arm around me. How do you feel? Exhausted but relieved, I replied. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I feel like I told my family the complete truth about who I am and what I need from them. And how do you think they took it? Better than I expected, honestly. It's going to take time for everyone to adjust to this new dynamic, but I think we can build something healthier than what we had before. Over the following weeks, the changes in my life accelerated rapidly. Bob and I moved into his penthouse apartment while we looked for a house that would reflect both of our personalities and needs. I started my college courses and threw myself into learning about nonprofit management and philanthropy with the enthusiasm of someone who had found their true calling. The most significant change was in my relationships with my children. The honest conversation we'd had that Saturday night had cleared the air in ways I hadn't expected. Once they understood that I was no longer willing to be taken for granted, they began treating me with a respect I hadn't experienced in years. Sophia and I grew closer than we'd ever been, bonding over our shared interest in helping other women find their voices and claim their power. She volunteered to help with our foundation, bringing her teaching skills to our educational programs. Danny surprised me by asking to be involved in the business side of our charitable work. His analytical mind and technology skills proved invaluable in setting up systems and processes for managing grants and tracking outcomes. Even Mike and Ashley began to change their approach to our relationship. The knowledge of my new financial status certainly influenced their attitude, but more importantly, they seemed to genuinely understand that their previous treatment of me had been hurtful and inappropriate. 6 months after our wedding, Bob and I hosted our first major fundraising event for the Linda Martinez Wellington Foundation for Women's Education. The ballroom of Phoenix's most exclusive hotel was filled with potential donors, community leaders, and women who had benefited from our scholarship programs. As I stood at the podium to address the audience, I looked out at the faces of people who had come to support our work, and I felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment I'd never experienced before. 8 months ago, I began. I was a part-time library employee who felt invisible in her own family. I had accepted that my best years were behind me, that my role in life was to support everyone else's dreams while setting aside my own. I could see my children in the audience, listening intently to words I never could have imagined speaking just a year earlier. But sometimes life gives us unexpected gifts, I continued. Sometimes we discover that it's never too late to become the person we were meant to be, to claim the life we deserve, to demand the respect we've always been worthy of receiving. The speech was well received, and the event raised over $2 million for our programs. But more importantly, it represented the complete transformation of Linda Martinez from invisible widow to empowered philanthropist, from someone who apologized for taking up space to someone who confidently claimed her place in the world. Later that evening, as Bob and I sat on the terrace of our new home overlooking the valley, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. "Do you ever regret the way things happened?" Bob asked. "The secrets, the family drama, the confrontations?" "No," I said without hesitation. "If I had done things differently, if I had asked permission or sought approval, I never would have found the courage to make the changes I needed to make. Sometimes you have to shock people into seeing you differently before they can learn to treat you differently. And are you happy with how your family has adjusted?" I thought about my relationships with my children, how they had evolved from obligation and habit into genuine respect and affection. "Yes," I said. "It took a crisis to get us there, but we're building something much healthier and more honest than what we had before." As I looked back on the woman I had been just months earlier, the woman who had meekly accepted the cancellation of her birthday party, who had lived quietly in the margins of her own life, I felt profound gratitude for the circumstances that had forced me to change. Mike's casual dismissal of my birthday celebration had been the catalyst I needed to recognize my own worth. His assumption that I would accept whatever scraps of attention he was willing to offer had awakened something in me that had been dormant for too long. Now, at 63, I was finally living the life I was meant to live. I was married to a man who cherished and respected me. I was pursuing meaningful work that used my skills and resources to help other women. I had relationships with my children based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to demand better treatment, to claim your worth, to refuse to be invisible in your own life. I had discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop accepting less than you deserve, because it forces everyone to rise to a higher standard. The woman who had proposed marriage to Bob Wellington and her small apartment kitchen was still recognizable in the woman who now ran a multi-million-dollar foundation. But she was stronger, more confident, more certain of her own value. She had learned that respect is not something you can earn through accommodation and sacrifice. It's something you command by refusing to accept anything less. As Bob and I sat in comfortable silence, watching the lights of Phoenix spread out below us, I thought about all the women who would benefit from our foundation's programs. Women who, like me, had forgotten their own worth. Women who needed to be reminded that their dreams mattered, their voices deserved to be heard, their lives were worthy of respect and celebration. My son had canceled my birthday party to fund his vacation. In response, I had canceled my old life and built a new one that was bigger, more meaningful, and more fulfilling than anything I could have imagined. Sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all, it's transformation. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.